Hello, my name is Weihang Zhu. This is my final work, as above, as below. My inspiration comes from Martin Heidegger's philosophy on death within his book Being and Time. In Martin Heidegger's view, death is not understood in a biological sense, but rather than in an ontological sense. According to Heidegger's philosophy of death, death is always present for the self in its being there. Therefore, we can understand our existence and death in the following way. Our existence is always towards death, and our death is always an existing death. Martin Heidegger believed that life is a kind of being and death is a phenomenon of life. Heidegger points out that although death is the end of all possibilities, but it also provides protections to us. When we understood that we are going to die, the choices we have to make about that end might awaken us to another perspective of action. Instead of seeing death as the opposite of life, he sees death as providing us with a kind of boundary. It is precisely because we know that we won't live forever that we will have a clearer direction of what we want to do. Thus, our cognition of death reflects to our perception of life. In Heidegger's philosophy, a fascinating point is that he thinks that we lack the concept of death at the beginning of life, as we have not yet experienced our own death. It's similar that we couldn't see our own faces with our own eyes. We need to use other mediums such as mirrors or cameras to see our appearance. Likewise, we understand death by learning from the death of others. I would like to talk about an experience I recently had with the death of another being. I came across a dead pigeon on the road. I had been lying there for a week until someone finally removed it. When I saw it, one idea came up to my mind. Someone should bury it. This idea has been running around in my head, and I'm starting to wonder what does the act of burial mean to us. After that, I'm starting to do research about burial. Burial is the oldest form of funeral ritual and is also the most widespread, with this form of burial practiced all over the world. Except to cover the smell, I think burial reflects human cognition of death. Burial often represents a form of respect. Such a kind of ritual indicates that people had already developed an understanding of death during that time. They are showing their care for the dead through this action. I conduct research on the reasons of burial, and the most common explanation can be categorized into three. 1. To show respect for the dead. For example, in China, there is a common saying, "Rest in peace after being buried," which shows a sense of peace and security for the dead. 2. Burial is seen as a way to mark the end of the dead's connections and obligations within their family and society. 3. Related to beliefs in the afterlife. Some people believe that burial is a necessary step for the dead to enter the afterlife or the next stage of existence. For example, in Chinese culture, ancient Chinese believed that individuals would continue to live a similar life after death. As a result, they would create houses, horses, and other items using materials like porcelain to be buried beside the dead. This action showed the belief that they could still live a life that is similar to their earthly existence, even after death. This perspective on death actually reflects people's cognition on life as well. After being buried beneath the soil, the celebration of death takes place in full swing, which is decomposition. Decomposition is the process by which dead organic substances are broken down into simpler organic or inorganic matter such as water, simple sugar, and mineral salts. Decomposition is the initial step in the recycling of nutrients that are used by plants or animals to build their bodies. This process is active and vigorous. From this moment on, both mentally and physically, we will no longer to be ourselves. Our existence will come to a completely end. Therefore, I won't consider death as a single moment in life. I believe that death begins from the moment vital signs cease, undergoes the entire process of decomposition, and only ends when decomposition is complete. After that, death will transform into life. Here, I would like to point out that soil, as one of the essential conditions of burial, has a very unique position. It exists between life and death, serving as a crucial medium for the continuous cycle of life and death. Underneath the soil, the faster the decomposition of organic matter, the more active death becomes. The intensity of death also varies. Temperature and humidity are two significant factors that influence the rate of decomposition. If both temperature and humidity are high, the decomposition rate will be at its fastest, meaning that the intensity of death will also reach its peak. In the process of my research, I also visited some cemeteries. An interesting observation is that death is abstract. It feels like death is the ever-changing pattern that appears on our eyelids when we close our eyes. Although we know it is there, we are still unable to see it clearly. Burial, however, gives a shape to death. It makes us aware that death is right there, in that place. During my visit, besides feeling the presence of death around me, I also sensed a lively feeling of life. There were grass, trees, moss, and sometimes even birds. I won't consider death and life to be opposing forces. Rather, they are interconnected and part of a continuous cycle. And this is a cemetery which is nearby my home. It's called Acton Cemetery. There are two poems I wrote based on my understanding of death. I try to use different mediums to show my cognition. The second poem contains the following line: Death began under the dirt and ends above it. The meaning is the dead is decomposed into nutrients for the seeds, and the plants breaking through the soil to become a new life. Due to the abstract nature of death, I hope to provide an immersive experience that expresses my understanding of death and the feeling of being surrounded by it. Therefore, starting from the perspective of soil burial, I visualized the intensity of death by real-time monitoring of soil temperature and humidity. My work will consist of two parts: the physical installation and the projection mapping. The physical installation is connected to a soil sensor, and it uses real-time data from the sensor to control its movements, really showing the active level of death. This is how the sensor working. And the rotation of steel blades is controlled by the temperature detected by soil sensor. When the temperature goes higher, the rotation angle will be bigger. Moreover, the rotation speed is controlled by the humidity of soil, with higher humidity resulting in faster rotation. All in all, the more obvious movement of the installation, the more active the state of depth. The physical installation consists of 24 motors and steel blades. I chose the number 24 to meant for the cycles, just like 24 hours in a day. And I made this sound design by myself. The form of the physical installation is derived from the connection form of spine. Additionally, I have combined the shape of Mobius ring to represent the interchanging relationship between life and death. The visual effect of projection mapping are derived from Rorschach test. The Rorschach test is a kind of test that studies perception patterns in order to examine projected emotions. I want to use this form to represent people's cognition of death while also mapping their understanding of life. The moving image is looping all the time, which represents the cycle of life and death, combined with several imageries such as eye trick and butterflies inspired by the silence of the lambs, and skeletons inspired by Salvador Dali. The projection also interacts with temperature and humidity data received from soil sensor. As the temperature and humidity increase, the images change faster, which represents a higher activity level of death. And I made this kind of effect in Touch Designer. I use coding and math to build all the structure. And there are some details of my work. Finally, I would like to talk about my production process. This work involved lots of handmaking work, which was a very special experience for me. As for selecting materials, I tried different kinds of metals to see how they looked under the projection. And for the blade part, I used a machine to cut it into strips, and then I drilled holes by hand. I also experimented with rusting it, although in the end I didn't go with that idea, but I still found it quite interesting. The motor required lots of cables, and I made all of these cables by my hand. This is how I connect everything together. I also use laser cutting to create a stand to install it on the ceiling. In the final show, however, I will use another kinds of stands to install it on the floor rather than hanging on the ceiling. And this is the process I install everything. I documented the installation process and made a video out of it. Due to the time, I won't play this video to the end, but I put the link in the PDF. So this is my final project. Thank you so much for your time.